Out of all the many things you could do with your time and with your life, why would you write poetry? There are many answers we could give according to modern writers, but 1700 years ago, a poet and thinker, Gregory Nazianzus, wrote a poem about why he writes poetry. And in this poem, it's called Aes ta emetra, which means something like on the metered or on metered things. In this poem, he gives 4 reasons why he writes poetry. Let's talk about them. So Gregory was a writer who lived in a very multi-ethnic, multicultural world. This was the world of late 4th century Constantinople and the surrounding communities, especially the more well-to-do, highly educated communities of Asia Minor. Now, Gregory was asked by lots of people why he wrote poetry and why he believed the things he believed. He was someone who engaged in cultural discourse. He gave sermons, he wrote letters, he wrote poems, and people wanted to know, why do you do what you do? And so towards the end of his life, Gregory wrote a poem that's a little over 100 lines long that at its core gives his 4 reasons for writing poetry. Before he gives his 4 reasons, he talks about some reasons why he doesn't write poetry. Among these are fame, glory, and money. He says, look, glory is wholly hollow, he says. I'm not writing for glory. I'm not writing for fame. And he even makes fun of people who try and figure out, well, what's popular right now and how can I write that kind of thing to gain glory from men? Now, if someone's a famous writer who goes down in history for the brilliance of their language and the beauty of their expression, and they say, oh, I'm not trying to be famous, sometimes we might say, well, you got famous, so are you sure it wasn't a priority? But Gregory says, no. I need to clarify. Why do I write if I'm not writing for fame and fortune and glory? And he gives 4 reasons. The first reason Gregory says is he writes to tame his loquaciousness. With measured labor first, I discipline my soul, for writing lines may order my unmetered mind and keep my greedy pen in check. Instead, I spend my sweat on metric form. This is the exact words that he uses in English translation, of course. Now, one of the cool things about this poem is it's all written in iambic hexameter. These are lines of 12 syllables each, and there's an iambic pattern to them. Da-da, 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 da-da. Instead, I spend my sweat on metric form. You can really hear the iambic pattern there. So he's writing in meter, and he says, I order my unmetered mind by writing metered poetry. Now, as we've talked about before on this channel, writing in meter, writing in a regular rhythm, it takes some work. You have to discipline your expression. The first words that come to mind might not quite fit the meter, might not quite be beautiful enough, might not quite be clear enough. And so there's a discipline that's necessary when writing formal poetry. And Gregory says this isn't just a discipline that results in a better poem, more beautiful or well-organized literary artwork. This is something that actually helps order our minds. We can get our minds and our verbal habits in check and hopefully improve through this writing. Some people have talked about how this kind of parallels some of Gregory and his contemporaries' idea about the life of virtue. The life of virtue is a life of discipline, a life of self-discipline, self-control, and self-ordering, both of one's internal state and of the community, toward justice, toward harmony. One of the things that Gregory really cared about in some of his prose writings is conspicuous wealth, which is hoarded to the detriment of one's community. So if one person is incredibly wealthy and everyone else is starving to death, this was an age of famines where things like this happened a lot, where a whole community could be starving. Gregory and others who were in Christian ministry at the time would give these fiery sermons saying, open up your stores of grain, open up, your generosity, spread, justice and food and resources to those who are in need. So this is something that Gregory cares about, not just sort of as an intellectual game, like let's see if I can make my words a little cooler, but poetry can help us discipline and take control of our internal states, which hopefully will have an effect on our external behavior, living more wise, virtuous, and generous lives. So that's number one. Number two, he says he writes for youths and whoever takes a deep delight in words. My verses read like sugar with elixir mixed, sweetening with art the bitterness of law. If the first reason is about sort of self-discipline and trying to seek a more virtuous and beautiful internal state and state of expression on the page, this second one kind of says, look, there's a lot of things that are important for people to hear about. And people love words. People take a deep delight in words. And he especially talks about, youths do this. Children love words. But also he recognizes any age can love words. And so if I want to talk about important things, about self-discipline, about generosity, about, virtuous communal living, I can use this self-disciplined, elegant language from the first reason to serve my community in the second reason. I can give to my community beauty of words that also have, calls to virtue, that there's moral good that I'm talking about. He uses that term law. But he says, look, if I just go around telling everyone what to do, stop being bad, be more generous, be more just, that can be onerous. If I can use the beauty and elegance of words to adorn my teachings about virtue, this will both delight children and those who take a delight in words, but also help the moral teaching be more palatable. Now, this is the one reason that I think Gregory can sometimes be criticized for, right? Isn't this just sort of like poetry is window dressing? A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. He even uses this language of sugar mixed with medicine or elixir. And I think he's open to that, and yet he's already said, look, we want a really disciplined, careful, elegant, artistically well-formed poetry, which is prior to using it to share with others and, give moral improvement to the community. So hopefully the poetry that comes out of the real introspective, self-disciplined reason is going to be as good of art as it can be. It won't be bad art that we say, well, we're just doing this for moral reasons or didactic reasons. And yet, Gregory, he's living in an age, this is the 400s AD, where, this is an age where Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, the teachings of Christ and the apostles, these are philosophical and theological traditions that people are trying to figure out, how do we live our lives in light of these? How do we continue to be formed by these wise books and teachers of the past? And Gregory is saying, look, literature doesn't just have to be frivolous. It can get involved in these more weighty theological, philosophical, political projects without losing its beauty. In fact, he gives a third reason where he kind of goes from this more like, I want to serve the youth, I want to serve those who delight in words in a morally edifying way. He says, third, and if this sounds petty, let me know, I write to win the current battle which we wage with words, where each side seeks linguistic victory. He says, look, it's not just that we need to discipline ourselves and become more moral and virtuous. It's not just that our community loves words and needs beauty, which is harmonized with goodness. It's that there's a real battle out there in culture, right? People are making arguments maybe that are wrong or unvirtuous, leading people astray. We want to win. And he says, I know it sounds petty, and I think it's interesting. Because as we talked about at the beginning, he says, I don't want glory. And he says, I do want a sort of victory of words. I want my words and the things that I think are true and virtuous and important. I want them to have cultural dominance. This is really interesting, right? This is something in America, as a pluralistic culture, not too different from the Constantinople of Gregory's day. We get worried about one voice having too much dominance. But I think he's right in saying, look, whenever you put something out there into culture that's well-formed, that's thoughtful about both morality and social and political good, as well as artistic beauty, this is going to have a powerful force in culture. And it's something that we need to recognize as an element of writing and actually can motivate us. But it's third in priority from self-discipline and the creation of good, well-formed art and the service of the community that you want to sort of promote and not just fight. We have this idea of the culture war where we're just, throwing things at each other, trying to win. Gregory says that's part of it, but it's not the most important. The fourth reason, which is, I think, in one sense, the most beautiful reason, he says, fourth, when winter wind brings sickness, struggle, death, my songs lull me, swan-like old man. He compares his songs to woodwind hymns, which give not a threnody, but a song to lead him ever onward. A threnody would be a song of mourning at death. And he says, no, my poems, when I write, I'm not trying to just mourn and despair. I'm trying to fortify myself for my journey ever onward. And there's this implication in the Greek that this journey onward is the journey through and past death. And he this is one of the reasons why people think it's written late in his career. He says, when winter wind brings sickness, struggle, and death. This seems to be the voice of an older man. He knows what it's like to be elderly, to not be in good health. And he says, look, poetry is, yes, sort of a stay against death, but also a fortification to enter death with hope. I think there's sort of a chiastic structure to these four reasons. We start with this self-discipline and mastery of an artistic form and beauty. And we end with this sort of returning to the self and saying, hey, I'm writing not just for others, but I'm writing to fortify myself against this eternal journey that I will take. This is where Gregory's, deep Christian conviction of the immortality of the soul and the importance of virtue both in this life and in the life to come is so important. Gregory thought he was going in death to find the source of all beauty. He didn't quite know what it was. He said, how can we speak of that which is, so beyond us? But he knew there was a beauty, capital B, out there. And he saw his practice of poetry as sort of a creating little beauty, lowercase b, the word in Greek is kalon or kalos, which was participating in and made possible by that ultimate beauty, kalos, capital kappa. So these four reasons are old, 1,700 years almost old. And yet this focus on look, the first duty of the artist is to discipline themselves and apprentice themselves to the craft, which will have internal moral improvement and will result in well-made art. And second, this well-made art is for other people. It's not just a selfish thing I keep to myself. I share it with my community. I share it with everyone who loves art and beauty. And I think there's real moral value to it. And it can help talk about those things that maybe it's hard to talk about without art. When we talk about, politics, how to run a city well, these are things people end up really fighting about. If we can approach it through the medium of art, maybe we can make it more winsome, more beautiful, and thus affect more change and more justice in the world. And third, he says, look, and we get into arguments about this, and this beauty and goodness properly allied can and should have cultural dominance over ugliness, over vice, over injustice. And then finally he sees, look, death is staring us in the face. Death is coming. And art is something that is involved in the human meditation on and reckoning with death. So why write poetry? Well, Gregory gave us 4 pretty good reasons to write and interact with poetry over a millennium and a half ago. And I think they're still relevant today. So as we think about poetry, even in our age, if we think about literature and art, how are Gregory's 4 reasons kind of resonating in our world today? Who are the poets who are taking seriously these sort of 4 levels and 4 types of focus and working toward the good both of themselves and their communities in their writing? If you want to read more about Gregory, his 4 reasons, and kind of how early Christian thought affects contemporary writing and thinking, my new book, The Poets and the Fathers, interacts with this a lot. You can pick it up wherever books are sold. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, looking at the ancient past and figuring out how the poets and writers and thinkers of that day, they're not too different from us. They're still dealing with these ultimate questions about who we are, who we should be, what art is, what can it be, and what the future holds for all of us.